Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So today we have Ayya Somā joining us remotely from Italy, where the Tudong continues, and she's joining in today so that we can share a few reflections on our experiences over the past few weeks of wandering through Italy and practicing Dhamma, sharing Dhamma in various parts of the country. So we can begin by paying homage to the Buddhas, and then we'll share some words on Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So Ayya Somā and I spent several weeks wandering through Italy, so practicing in actually almost every region of the country, sharing Dhamma with a wide variety of different people in different settings and different circumstances. And today we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what that was like and what reflections we've had on that, and also to answer any questions that you might have related to any of our experiences. So maybe we can start by inviting Ayya Somā to begin with saying a little bit about her experience over the past few weeks. So Ayya, if you'd like to get us started, please.
Thank you, Bhante. Well, up until this Monday, I was traveling with several other monastics, including you. And now all of a sudden I am by myself. So I have to say it's like a new trip right now. Less pleasant than the first one, I have to say. It's there's actually an entirely different feeling in traveling as a group of monastics, both for ourselves, both for our personal for our personal practice, our personal way of relating to our vows and our spiritual path, since we're all on the same page. And of course, while we're by ourselves, and so not as a group, then people around, when we are not in a Buddhist country, will have a bit of a harder time to even understand that they're actually that we are monastics, as opposed to when we're in a group. Of course, it's very clear that something is going on. And it's not just Ayya Somā who decided to wear a really weird outfit and a really weird haircut, maybe. But there is actually a sense of, something that, some vows that are shared, some vows that are kept in unison. So it's interesting also to discover this sort of more solo way of traveling around Italy. This is our third time that we have come to my home country to share the Dhamma, invited by many lovely folks. And as Ayya Brahmavara was saying, always, even when we weren't doing our formal Tudong practice, the Tudong continues. The Tudong is always kind of present. And what does that mean? Essentially, we are always putting ourselves in specific conditions so that we can fully understand better the precepts, fully can understand how the precepts support the Dhamma, and how actually just simply following Dhamma Vinaya can be an incredible, powerful way to share the teachings of the Buddha without actually giving ever a Dhamma talk, without ever even communicating in the same language with people. In our group, of course, I was the only one who also shared the Italian language fluently, obviously, since I come from here. And Bhante Suddhaso actually is getting there, since Bhante, you've been studying Italian now for some time, and I was very happy to see also you sharing the Dhamma from time to time in Italian, and actually giving your first full Dhamma talk, which was actually quite impressive, with the people there in Milan right before you left. So that's all very promising. So what to say? I don't know. There's so many different experiences that we've had, different encounters that we've had, so much happiness everywhere for people here in this country to see monastics, and so many actually teachings, I would say, for myself as well. I remember maybe actually today what comes to mind is the teaching on karma, that sometimes we can read in the suttas, the sort of the how the Buddha tells us how certain actions lead to certain consequences, and some of them might seem intuitively correct, like for example getting anger might lead to ugliness. We can see it that really angry people, even if they were born with really pretty features at a certain point, while cultivating anger without actually being waiting for the next rebirth, but within this life they can start taking up some ugly features in the face. But some others, like being generous leads to wealth. That's a little bit more counterintuitive. That's a little bit, excuse me, it's a little bit difficult to straight away understand. And most often than not, us Buddhists, we kind of tend to take it out of faith, right? We're like, okay, well, I see that usually wealth around me, I feel like it's actually a process of accumulation. But the Buddha says that it's actually through giving. So we're like, okay, sure. All right. I'm sure that by giving I'll be wealthy, but I'm not quite sure. Okay, yes, maybe giving is like pleasant, or maybe I'm giving because the Buddha said it's the correct thing to do. And we can have all of these sort of weird kind of ways of relating to it. But one of the most beautiful, actually direct examples in life that I had during our trip or Tudong practice, related on this karma of giving and this vipaka of wealth, was actually when we were going pindapata one day in Rome. And usually throughout the country, including in Rome, people have been very generous, and we never actually had to skip a meal, and we always had more than enough. And most people were always like very happy to see us and support us, but sometimes things weren't going exactly this way. Sometimes people were a little bit more grumpy, and I remember when we standed in front of this coffee shop in a farmer's market, and shortly thereafter, the owner who thought that there are these like three beggars in front of my shop and they look weird, and I don't know, they're probably going to scare potential customers away, and I don't want them to be associated with my shop, probably thinking with that fear of losing income, fear of losing any type of accumulation of wealth. So then she came out and she started yelling at us and telling us quite forcefully to leave immediately her store, which of course we did, and we sent her much metta, and then found another stand in the market. And on the other hand, the lady there, as soon as she saw us, and it was clearly the time that was coming close to lunch and everything, and she had the shop owner, an entirely different kind of way of approaching our presence, which was essentially, how can I help you? Because she realized we weren't accepting money when people were trying to give us money in the bowl. And she figured out that we needed food. So she started, sharing, spreading the word around that there are these three monks that they're they don't accept money, and they're doing this really ascetic practice of wandering around, and maybe they should have some fruit, and maybe should have some vegetables, and maybe what else can we give them, and so forth. And actually, very quickly, she created the conditions for lots of people to get us things that were nutritious, and also actually at the same time, lots of people purchased things from her store. And it was quite remarkable actually to see this incredible instant wealth that her giving, sort of her act of giving, provided. It was one of those like sudden karma and vipaka, like you do the karma and you get the vipaka straight away, in a way. And it was, of course, the material wealth that we can say actually, she sold a lot of things that she wouldn't have sold, if we hadn't been there. But also the wealth of all the incredible mind states that she had the opportunity in that morning to cultivate, and that were bringing her, so much happiness right here, right now. And then when we left, I remember her saying, "Oh, you're leaving already." Like she was, sad, but not only because, of course, she had sold more bread, but because actually, whenever we help others, whenever we rejoice also in other people's giving, which she was doing, whether people were buying from her store or her friend or her neighbor's store or someone else's store, or just simply, helping out as much as they could. She was rejoicing. So she was practicing mudita, joy in her mind of her actions, and joy of also other people's, happiness while they were giving, and our happiness in receiving and being these fields of merit. So it was all like so incredibly wholesome. And I feel like actually, once again, this is just one of the incredible, beautiful situations where we see the wisdom of the Buddha, and in giving us these precepts. And even though sometimes it can be really difficult and really hard to follow them, especially when we are, in a foreign land, without anyone waiting for us or expecting us in different places, how it's so beautiful, because then it was also such a beautiful thing to have for us to be able to share the Dhamma in this worldless way, in a way. So these are some thoughts that come to mind.
Great, thank you, Ayya Somā. And yeah, also reflecting upon the time wandering in Italy. So especially the time that we spent doing a formal Tudong practice, so wandering with no plan, with nobody expecting us. But also throughout the whole trip, what really comes up strongly for me is the power of the precepts that we follow. So the power of the Vinaya practice. I remember at one point somebody asking us like, "Oh, when you travel, isn't it okay to relax your precepts? Isn't it okay to be more flexible about Vinaya while you're traveling? Isn't that the right thing to do? It's already difficult enough to follow the Vinaya in a monastery, and shouldn't you be even more flexible when you're outside the monastery?" And actually, the answer is no. It's actually quite the opposite. The precepts are what protects us. The precepts are what supports us. So they look like restrictions if one looks at them without sufficient wisdom. It looks like limitations. But actually, these are supports. They're things which lift us up, which hold us up. It's like actually a simile that's used in the Catholic monastic tradition is that it's like the trellis for vines to grow on. So with no trellis, then the vines just kind of flop around on the ground and they don't grow very well. But with a trellis, then the vines will grow upwards. They'll grow strong and healthy. So in the same way, the Vinaya precepts that we follow, they are quite rigid and extensive. But actually, that's exactly what a good trellis is. A good trellis is sturdy, it's strong, it's rigid, it's extensive. so that gives plenty of support and space for the vines to grow. So in the same way, we do have these quite rigid and inflexible rules. So we don't carry money, we don't eat after solar noon, we don't store food overnight. We have very few garments, so we can't buy our own train tickets, we can't rent a car, we can't rent a hotel. Like there's all sorts of things which seem very constrictive and inconvenient and awkward. But actually, by applying ourselves diligently to these precepts, then what's happened over the past few weeks? What's happened is that countless people have stepped up and asked, how can I help? What do you need? What can I offer? Do you need something to eat? Do you need somewhere to stay? Do you need a train ticket? How can I help? And so that gives us this opportunity to be available to others, to be present in the lives of others. It was also really touching the last week or so that we were in Italy. So it was raining much of the time, so it wasn't very convenient to do alms round. So then we had several of our lay friends were asking, like, oh, so do you need a meal offered on this day or that day? Well, maybe I can help, maybe I can cook, or maybe we can make something happen. So again, people start looking out for you. They start to cultivate this mind of thoughtfulness, of consideration. So this also is one of the really valuable aspects of this strict Vinaya practice. So it's a practice which, for the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who follow Vinaya, it helps us to practice contentment, to practice simplicity, to practice humility, to practice tolerance. But also for the lay people who interact with the monastics, it helps to train them in the qualities of thoughtfulness and consideration. So these are two extremely important qualities of our practice. So we talk a lot about generosity. So of course, generosity is one of the foundation stones of Buddhist practice. And without practicing generosity, it's very difficult to make much progress in the Buddhist path. But a more refined practice is the practice of thoughtfulness or consideration. So to actually think, what would be helpful to that person? What would be supportive to that person? What would be beneficial to that person? How can I make sure that they get what they need? How can I make sure they get what they appreciate? So, and this also is one of the real powers of, for example, the fact that we don't use money, we don't receive money, we don't buy our own things. Because then it makes people think more carefully. Like they can't just give us a pile of money and expect us to sort it out from there. But rather, there needs to be this consideration of like, well, what do they actually need? What would they be lacking in that I could help supply, that I could help provide? So it cultivates a deeper degree of metta and karuna, so loving kindness and compassion, which deepens one's generosity practice. It brings it to a much more profound level. And also, again, coming back to the topic of precept practice. So the precepts are, again, they're ways that we live a simple life. They're ways that we are easy to look after, easy to care for. But there are also things which help to keep us from making errors as we go through the world. So we have practices which are, for the lay people, there's the 5 precepts. So this basic moral foundation of avoiding causing harm and trying to do good in the world. And of course, as monastics, we have many more precepts, some of which are training principles, but many of which are also moral principles. And when we stay firmly committed to these, then we are harmless. And there's this commitment to being harmless in every situation, to every person that we encounter, to every being that we encounter. So it generates an aura of safety. So even while going through conditions which might not seem particularly safe from the outside, because we have a commitment to harmlessness, a commitment to purity, a commitment to blamelessness, then we can enter those situations with a fearless mind. And also then the beings that we encounter then tend to respond similarly. They tend to also respond with a sense of harmlessness, a sense of gentleness. So even though from one perspective, our monastic practices make us vulnerable. So for example, when we were wandering through Sicily, we were vulnerable in the sense that we had nowhere to stay, nothing to eat, no extra supplies, no safety net whatsoever, and we didn't know anyone. And yet, because of this commitment to upholding our precepts, we knew that we had nothing to fear. We knew that we wished no harm to any being, and therefore, it was very unlikely that any being would seek to harm us. So we were able to move through the situation of great vulnerability without any fear in the mind, without any concern for our own safety. And so actually the whole time I was in Italy, I was never afraid, because I knew that the Vinaya was always there as my place of safety, my place of fearlessness. And you can also see how then that affects the people around us. So when we have a mind of fearlessness, then also the people around us tend to feel at ease. When we have a mind of harmlessness, then the people around us feel safe. They know that there's nothing to fear from us. So actually in one of the suttas, the Buddha said that when we follow precepts, we give to the world the gift of safety, the gift of fearlessness. And this also is something which is, again, comes up very strongly and clearly during wandering practice. So those are a few thoughts on my mind. Maybe Ayya Somā, if you'd like to share a few more words, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bhante. Yes. What came to mind when you were talking was actually when we went to Sicily, and how it was very interesting how many people would stop us to ask us who we were, but also if we were missionaries, which I found very interesting. At first, I was not quite understanding why people were asking if we were missionaries. And I was like, no, not really. And they're like, okay, so then why are you here? Like for holiday? I'm like, no, we're not here for holiday. So why are you here? Why are you doing all of this? And we were like, well, as a personal practice, that's why we're here. That was during obviously our intensive tudong, so the place where actually nobody had invited us anywhere to share the teachings of the Dhamma. So for 2 weeks we were just sleeping wherever, eating whatever, that kind of the eating whatever happened throughout the trip. But in particular there, nobody was even familiar with what a Buddhist monastic was. And so we were changing spot from every day. But yeah, well, people were very, very surprised that we weren't missionaries and that we weren't there to ask or want anything at all. And that we were actually doing this intense practice of renunciation to as a means to create the conditions for the mind to liberate itself. And it was really beautiful to me how people were responding so well to this, and actually so much more happily when they were understanding that we had that we didn't want anything from them. And also when some Catholic folks were off giving us alms, and then they were like, oh, well, we're Catholic though, we're not interested in converting. And I was like, well, that's great, I'm very happy that you're practicing Catholicism. And they were so happy that we're all happy. And that there was this beautiful, once again, this exchange of just of beauty of intentions also. I think that is so much part of karma. It's so much part of the Noble Eightfold Path, Sama Sankappa. So the right intention, the intention of renunciation, the intention of harmlessness, and how this is an international language when people can really see that that is actually the intention, feel it. Then, the answer immediately is, that is amazing. That is amazing. That is what, Italian people there would say, stupefacente, stupefacente. Sicilians, actually, that was their favorite, remark, to whenever we were sharing, once again, that we were interested in converting the whole Sicilian population, and that we had no hidden agenda. And then I remember them asking us, like, oh, so what are your precepts? And then I was like, well, we don't handle money. And they were like, amazing, amazing. Where do you sleep? We don't know. We have no shelter, and because we don't use money, so we also can't, afford to get anything. And they were like, amazing, amazing, this is amazing. And then once again, all the precepts that you said, Bhante, not eating after noon, not storing food, and the answer was always even more amazing, amazing. So this joy and this appreciation for renunciation is something that actually not everyone has, but there are, certain situations where, we're all kind of speaking the same language. And I felt that during our Tudong in Sicily, it was very special in that way to see also the beauty of the history of renunciation that the monastic orders have upheld in the country, in Italy, and how that has become very much Italian culture, and even secular Italian culture. So this appreciation for people who are renunciants, and this sign of the samana. And then I think maybe perhaps in these modern days, the appreciation that also nobody wants to, try to convince you to switch religion and to adopt a belief system and therefore get something, out of you, whether it's a follower or whether it's money or whether it's, whatever kind of the currency. There's so many different ways through which we tend to be so utilitarian in our connections with people. And so I feel like this non-utilitarian way, non-commercial way of relating to humans has allowed us to see the best in all the inhabitants there. And I think for them to see all the best in us as well. And so, yeah, I can only think of the mayor, for example, of San Fratello, this beautiful town in Sicily that met us and the day before, and got familiarized with our precepts, and then wanted to offer us lunch. And because we couldn't eat afternoon, he essentially asked a friend of a friend to open their restaurant at 11 a.m. specifically for the Sangha, and for us to have our meal before we left the town. And it was just so beautiful. It filled my heart, especially when we think of mayors, politicians, we always think of something very much, charged, an area that I had never heard of any politician do anything, just for the sake of being kind and generous and with their time or their personal money. And I have to say that actually, yeah, the mayor of San Fratello proved me wrong, and the Sicilian people proved me wrong. And, also all the friends in the Catholic Church that we have met that have provided us shelter actually voluntarily when it was pouring rain outside. And they were very concerned that we wanted to sleep in the tents in the middle of nowhere. And so how all of this shelter manifested, as you said, Bhante, it's such a beautiful privilege actually also to be able to follow these precepts and see this incredible beauty of the human mind, As Bhante Suddhaso says, usually we hear many heartbreaking news, but I have to say that when one opens the maybe the newspaper of Italy, it's full of heartbreaking news. But actually, our experience of Italy has been, thanks to the precepts, this beautiful, heartwarming news. Every day there was heartwarming news. There was the heartwarming news of generosity, of hospitality, of kindness, of feeding. And yeah, I'm very, very grateful for the Buddha and for this path, and for all my Kalyanamitta friends like you and Bhante Kosala and Ayya Brahmavara, that we were able to travel together.
Great. Well, thank you, Ayya, for those beautiful words. And I think at this time we can take any questions that people might have. So first off, hello to all the people joining in online. So hello to John, Maria, Lo, Vero, Manal, Usha, Pintu, Jevli, Sud, Richard, Charles Lee, Agod, Anne. So hello to all of you. So at this time, if anyone has any questions, also the monastery residents, if anyone has any questions, or if there's no questions, do you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned dana, generosity, came up a lot in this in your recollection of your trip, and I had just been thinking about recently how the word forgiveness has the word giving in it, and I was wondering if generosity practice helps with forgiveness at all, or what the relationship with generosity and forgiveness would be.
So Ayya, did you hear his question?
A little bit. Bhante, if you can repeat it, that would be great. Thank you.
He's asking if there's a connection between the practice of generosity and of forgiveness. So do you want to say some words on this topic, Ayya?
Sure, I can try. I would say definitely, absolutely, forgiveness is definitely a form of dana. Yeah. Well, both to the person who perhaps has misbehaved, and also to ourselves, so we don't have resentment. So it's a win-win sort of situation. Actually, some friends of mine were going through a bit of a hard time. Some friends from my previous life, within this life, were having a bit of some issues in their kind of relationship. And one of the people, usually, the lady in the relationship, was having a really hard time, actually forgiving her partner. And at a certain point, I think she managed to do it, and it was once again this example of giving trust to someone, of creating the conditions for that person to actually change, and for her to drop the resentment, and for her to let go. So absolutely, I would say that forgiveness is one of the forms of non-material dana that we have the opportunity to practice all the time. We tend to focus so much whenever we use dana with things, with objects, with sort of physical things, but actually there's always so much that we can give. And actually, especially in these days where most of the world is, definitely most of the Western world is doing, has actually the opposite problem, like the problem of overconsumption and of too much of, say, material things. The non-material things are the ones that actually lack the most. The time that we can give to people, the patience that we can give to people, so many non-material things that are so much more needed. Actually, we should all do, all of these should be packaged into gifts for this Christmas, all the holidays. I would say that maybe less kind of objects and more kindness, more forgiveness.
Yeah, thank you for those reminders. That's really important to keep in mind, generosity of non-material things. Yeah, thank you for that. And we have a question from Sud. Sud says, did you take any lay people to help you out on this journey? How did you travel after landing at the airport? Most of the time we did not travel with lay people this time around, and that was deliberate. So it's a reflection again on the power of the Vinaya itself. So when you bring lay people with you, then you always know that you have a safety net. You always have an escape route if things get a little bit challenging. But when it's just bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, then your safety net is the Vinaya itself. So traveling as a group of monastics without lay people, it's both a expression of faith in the power of the Vinaya, so faith in the wisdom of the Buddha and how he set up the Vinaya in the first place. And also it's a way of deepening one's faith in the Vinaya. Because when you're put in situations where that's your only safety net, and you just relax and fall into it, then you realize that it actually does carry you. It actually does hold you. How did we travel after landing at the airport? Well, we have some very nice lay people in Italy who sent us train tickets. So that made life significantly easier. We also had some people who gave us rides when rides were necessary, and often we would just walk. So it's amazing how far you can get when you walk for a few hours. So you think, it's actually really interesting. Most people, they think like walking an hour, they're like, oh, it's so far, walking an hour. But it got to a point where we're just like, oh, it's not that far. It's only a 4-hour walk. And people are like, wait, what? It's how far? It's like, oh, we do that all the time. No problem. So yeah, I mean, getting around is never a problem. And maybe this next one, Ayya Somā, if you'd like to take this one. It says, sleeping outside in the rain is difficult on the body. Did you encounter any health problems?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the health problems that we feel like we're getting when we're doing meditation retreats and we're sitting for long periods of time. Then the mind starts creating all these stories on how, we're losing our leg and it's the last time we're ever gonna have, legs, and all our nerves are exploding and all of these things, which of course, if someone is very crazy and does certain postures straight away, it's not a possibility, but could lead to danger. But 99.9% of the case, the chances are that actually we're totally fine, and it's just the mind that is complaining about the Vedana, the sensation that it's feeling that is unpleasant. So to a certain degree, the rain is exactly the same. So there is definitely a little bit more humidity. And definitely this Tudong, just like the previous ones, I was underdressed. And that seems to be my kind of karma during Tudong, is that I am never warm enough at night. I must have not given enough warm things to people in my past life. Because I'm always well fed, but I'm always underdressed. But I think it has to do more with me than with my lack of planning than with really past karma. But jokes aside, yeah, in those situations, of course, there's a little bit more humidity and there's the sensation that the actual cold is coming closer to kind of like the bones, especially if one is sleeping at night. And the truth is also that as soon as I woke up in the morning, and there was a lot of unpleasant feelings, a lot of unpleasant Vedana, after a while, I was able to become equanimous towards it, and it was all right, and it was fine. And so that's the part of letting go that we do. And that's also why we put ourselves in kind of these situations that are a little bit more extreme than usual. So there's actually something to let go of, because sleeping, for example, now at my parents' place, so everything is very comfortable and warm and the right temperature. And actually, I kind of know that every morning I'll have food most likely offered and so forth, all of that. Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a different type of practice that I have to do because with my family, but it's still significantly like more comfortable than when I wasn't Tudong. So there's a lot more to be equanimous about when we're doing these kinds of practices. And rain is one of them. Also seeing how uncomfortable we feel when we are outside with all the elements, and how actually we spend our entire life avoiding all these elements. But that doesn't mean that we're transcending our discomfort towards the elements. It just means that we're avoiding them until something happens, and then we can't avoid them anymore, and there is dukkha. So the practice is facing all the the fears that we might have, all the unsolved dukkha, and understand that it's okay. It doesn't matter if there's rain or if there's not rain, if there's sun or if there's wind, or if there's, if it's night, if like whatever it is, the conditions, we just try to continually practice being content, regardless of all the conditions.
Great, thank you. And we have another question here from Charles Lee. It says, did the monastic Sangha do any formal teaching of meditation or Dhamma talks to lay people encounter during Tudong? Does someone have to ask specifically for a teaching? So, as we were wandering around, people very often would ask us questions. Actually, most often people would ask questions related to Vinaya, as Ayya Somā mentioned earlier. But also people would often ask us questions about Dhamma. And when asked questions, then we talk. So we answer questions, we give explanations. If people are interested in doing a bit of meditation, then we'll offer some guidance on meditation practice. But as Ayya Somā mentioned during the Tudong, our focus was on doing our own practice, which means we weren't seeking out to create teaching events per se. But rather we were constantly available for anyone who was interested in approaching us and asking questions and having some conversation. And of course, we only ever really talk about Dhamma Vinaya. We don't really talk about anything else. So any conversation with us inevitably is a conversation about Dhamma Vinaya. And so it's not the case that people necessarily have to ask specifically for a teaching, but rather that, so there's when we actually create a Dhamma event, in which case anyone who's there is kind of implicitly asking for teachings, otherwise they wouldn't be there. But then when we're just wandering around in a more informal way, then anyone who approaches us is seeking to know about Dhamma Vinaya. So then in that case, yes, we do wait for people to ask. So as Ayya Somā said earlier, we're not missionaries. We don't go around with big signs that say, Buddha saves, you need Buddha. But rather when people are interested, then we respond as appropriately as we can. Next we have another question from Sud. So maybe this one would be nice for Ayya Somā to answer. This one says, did you face any dangers from animals? Did you note any areas restricted? How did you know where to stay and where places are safe to camp and restricted to camp?
So, did you face any dangers from animals? Yes, in my mind. So that seems to be the recurrent theme of all my Tudong practice. It's kind of becoming actually like a meditation retreat at Empty Cloud Monastery in the way that we have a schedule. Now I kind of have like in my mind the schedule of my Tudong practice, which is starts in the evening, and it's 7 p.m. fear of animal, 8 p.m. stronger fear of animal, 9 p.m. really terrorized by animals. And then 11 p.m., it's cold. Midnight, it's really, really cold. 1 a.m., hoping for animals to just kill me already so I can stop being so in pain with all the cold. Then, falling asleep and then waking up again for the cold and going, okay, doesn't matter. Either, I deal with it, etc. And then this repeats for the first 2 or 3 days. And then by the third day, I'm kind of like, third or fourth day, I'm kind of like, all right, this is what is going to happen. And if it's my time to die from wild animals, then so be it. And the cold, I haven't died from the cold yet. If I will die from the cold, that's also fine. It means my time has arrived. So why do I want to die in this kind of state of terror and confusion? And and my mind settles and becomes more equanimous and more patient. And yeah, that's it. And as far as the question, did you note any areas restricted? Actually, it was a little bit more challenging in Sicily than it was in Lazio, where we did our last Udang in the spring. So in Sicily, actually, everything is kind of somewhat restricted to a certain degree or the other. So we had to walk significantly longer to find patches of forest. So there has been lots of deforestation in that land. I mean, not in the past centuries, but I think in the past millennia. It's a long problem. So there is not much forest, and it was a little bit complex. And we would, in terms of your last question, how did we know where to stay and where places are safe to camp and restricted to camp? It was mainly, could we find a forest or any kind of patch of land that seemed like it wasn't private property? And actually, because we didn't have many choices, because as I mentioned, everything was kind of fenced off, it was easier. As they say, choice is not happiness. So so we're very happy to have no choice, because it was like, oh, look at that only place where we could possibly camp. Let's take advantage of it. And then as Bhante mentioned earlier, it's just the question of faith, of like hoping, sometimes actually it was really desperate, the situation, because everything was fenced off and there was no forest. And some lay people showed up out of nowhere and stopped and asked us, can I help you? Like, for example, literally when we were walking in the middle of the street one day, and we're like, well, yeah, actually you could help us find a place where we could pitch our tents. And then he was like, oh, let me ask. Actually, I think that's how we might have met the mayor that I was mentioning earlier. I think that was one of the situations that then he put us in touch with the mayor, who had a little, like a town hall where there was possibly some land, like things like this, or just people offering, to call the local priest. This is what happened, in a town. They called the priest because it was about to rain, and so they were like, this is unthinkable that you're going to go and camp with all this massive rain. And so we stayed at the scouts, the boy and girl scouts in this little town there. So yeah, it's all, we have faith in Dhamma Vinaya, and actually it just kind of somewhat comes together.
Great. And that's the last question. So if there's nothing else, okay. So maybe that's enough for today. Thank you, Ayya Somā, for joining in from Italy. So taking a break from looking after your parents to join the Dhamma stream. And also to all the wonderful people who we've encountered over the past few weeks in Italy, all the people who have practiced Dhamma Vinaya together with us. And of course, deep gratitude to the Buddha for creating this beautiful system of practice for all of us. So we can end it this time with 3 sadhus.
Oh, Bhante, 1 second. There's Sheila who has a question. Maybe you can take it.
Okay, so Sheila says, how do you decide where to do tudong? Well, on this occasion, since we were doing it in November, our main consideration is where is it not going to be too terribly cold at night? So Sicily was being the farthest south region of Italy. It was naturally the warmest region. Still turned out to be a little bit chilly at night, but it was okay. Yeah, how do we decide where to do tudong? So we've been doing tudong in Italy, which, as it turns out, is an absolutely wonderful place for it, because Italy is full of really warm-hearted, generous, caring people who seem to really like monks of any tradition. So it's actually quite a convenient place to do this practice. Also, another perk of Italy is that there's villages every few kilometers, which also makes it relatively straightforward. That said, we're open to other places. The future is limitless, so we'll see what happens. So we'll go ahead and end at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Bhante.
And thank you, Ayya.